we're at Unit 6, which contains 3 components. We are currently at the first component, which is communications. And essentially what we're doing here is talking about workplace communications, okay? So it's very primarily focused on workplace communications. Yesterday I went through the major objectives, and as I say, the major objectives for the communications one, which is what we're focused on here, we're going to define what communications is and how communication occurs in the workplace, the barriers to effective communication, the informal communication known as the grapevine and what its factors are, verbal and nonverbal communications, gender roles, challenges of cross-cultural communication, computer-mediated communication, and obviously at the end just kind of saying, okay, look, here are all the things we can do in order to do a better job of communications. The second part of this we'll look at later, which is the conflict and the issues around negotiations. In terms of the key resources for this, what we're looking at primarily here is Chapter 6, particularly in this particular section. Okay, so communications is a process which information is relayed, okay? So it's really that exchange of information between sender and a receiver. So the sender encodes the message, it goes through some channel and comes out the other end, is decoded by the receiver, and the receiver will either interpret the message correctly or incorrectly interpret the message. Sometimes the receiver will give some feedback, which is great because it helps clarify any uncertainties. Graphically, you can see the communications process in this little graphic right here. This is a good little graphic because what it does is it talks about communication or breaks it down into its key components. Someone sends a message, we can call that the sender or the source. That gets encoded, for example, my voice through this microphone, through the internet. That's kind of what we call encoding. It goes through the channel, which is the internet, decoded, comes out on your speaker, which is by your computer, and that is decoded into sound, and you are the receiver. Now, the thing is, that process seems pretty straightforward. Here we go. The information is just flowing right through it like this. The problem with it is that sometimes communication is not as clear. And why isn't it as clear? Well, it's not as clear because sometimes there's something called noise in the system. This could be literally noise or figuratively noise. Literally noise, it's, Mackenzie got the problem of the dog snoring. The dog is snoring there. Man, is that dog ever snoring loudly? And she can't hear what I'm saying on the microphone, on the speaker. So as a result, the dog is interfering with the receiver, in this case Mackenzie's, ability to hear. So there's an example of noise. But we could also have noise. Let's say Chantel is dreaming about making sub sandwiches, okay? And she's dreaming about this right now. She's dreaming about it so much that she's thinking, oh yes, Parmesan oregano. And so I'm talking, and all she's thinking about is Parmesan and oregano. So as a result, she didn't hear what I said. So the receiver didn't hear the message. That's a form of noise too, distraction or just not being aware of what was said. So that is a little bit of a problem that sometimes occurs in communication. The big problems that occur in communication deals with these two circles, and that is the field of experience. As you get older, you will get a greater, this field of experience will get bigger and bigger and bigger because the been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, threw up on it factor comes into play where you say, yeah, I've experienced that and I kind of have an idea of what you're talking about. Okay? Younger people will tend not to have as great a field of experience. So if they're talking, if for example, the sender is talking about something totally foreign, the communications process, and you've never heard of the communications process before, and so the sender's field of experience is kind of like taking it for granted. Well, obviously, everybody knows about the communications process. You know, I've done this 1,000 times. I'm just going to jaunt over it very quickly. From the receiver's point of view, you're saying, I've never heard of this before. I don't know what these circles are about. I don't know anything about channel message. You didn't say anything about channel message. I don't understand what you're talking about. Because of the differences in field of experiences, often the messages get corrupted. Okay? I gave a very simple example yesterday. I'll give a simple example again. Imagine your hometown. Now, wherever you grew up, think about some distinctive feature of your hometown. Okay? That distinctive feature, is everybody aware of that distinctive feature? Like if we said in Clarenville, oh yeah, I'm going up on Bear Mountain. Now, people who live in Clarenville probably have an idea where Bear Mountain is. They probably have been up on Bear Mountain. They probably know what the view of Bear Mountain is. They've seen pictures of it. They know the star is up there. But if you said to someone from St. John's who has never been up on Bear Mountain, don't know where Bear Mountain is, or don't know anything about Clarenville Star, their field of experience is different. So as a result, they don't understand what you're saying. Where the heck is Bear Mountain? That would be the typical response. So speaking of response, in order for the communication process to work, considering noise and considering different field of experiences, we have to have an opportunity for feedback. Now, one of the challenges with this system we're using here now, if we were in a classroom, I'd be looking at you now and I would see your eyes rolling or glazing or closed. So at this point in time, I would say, well, you don't understand what I'm talking about because obviously you got that look about you, the dazed and confused look. I can't tell now if you have that dazed and confused look. I have no feedback loop. Other than hear you speak every once in a while, there is no feedback loop for me in this process, especially if we don't have cameras on. Okay? So this is a challenge in this environment that we're in now in terms of limited feedback from my perspective. That is, from my perspective, the limited feedback makes me question whether or not this process is working well. We also talked about two different types of communication. There's formal communication, which is the official communication of the workplace. So for example, it's normally written, it's normally, I'll call it formal, to whom it may concern. Please do not flush the toilet in the washroom. That sort of thing. You can imagine that being formal communications. So they're very common. And they're very common, in the workplace, educational settings, and these sorts of environments that we see all the time that are set up for formal communications. It can be written or oral, and it could be personal, one-on-one, or one to a group, but oftentimes formal communications tend to be written. The other type of communications is informal communications, where it's the grapevine is the word that's often used to describe what we mean by informal communications. You heard it through the grapevine, Marvin Gaye, or Clearwater Revival. The grapevine is really an informal communications network amongst friends. It could be at work, it could be at home. It's gossip, it's the latest news, it's water cooler talk, these sorts of things. And the grapevine usually is word of mouth, but it could be written, could be email, could be any number of communications tools, texts. Organizations fear the grapevine because unofficial news gets sent out that way, and the organization has no control over it. And it could be wrong, it could be right, it could be something that they want released or something they don't want released. So let's just look at this.
Gertrude has returned to work at her toy company job after a week's vacation. She heads to her office and cringes when she turns on her computer. Her email inbox shows 400 messages waiting for her reply, as well as a bunch of voicemails. Gertrude sighs and realizes there's no escape from workplace communication. Workplace communication is the transmitting of information between one person or group and another person or group in an organization. It can include emails, text messages, voicemails, notes, etc. Workplace communication is vital to an organization's ability to be productive and operate smoothly. Number 1, workplace communication improves worker productivity. Research has shown that effective lateral and workgroup communication leads to an improvement in overall company performance. It has also been discovered that employees who were graded as highest in production had received the most effective communication from their superiors. For example, Gertrude works in engineering, and her prototypes of toys receive accolades. She is an effective communicator about her designs and how they'll be played with in real life by kids. In addition, she receives specific guidance from her superiors, allowing her to create designs quickly and efficiently. Number 2, workplace communication can increase employee job satisfaction. Employees feel empowered if they're able to have upward communication. This type of communication is when information flows upward in an organization and usually consists of feedback. If bosses or managers are able to listen to employees and respond, this leads to an increase in employee job satisfaction. In addition, employees are also happy if there is intense downward communication, which is information flowing down from superiors or managers to direct reports. Gertrude recently sent an email to her boss recommending that her department upgrade its design software. Her upward communication feedback was not just acknowledged, but also acted upon, resulting in a very happy design team. Number 3, workplace communication can also have a positive effect on absenteeism and turnover rates. Communication flow is very important to workers. Employees have to feel secure that they are receiving truthful and updated information from superiors. They also want to have the ability to share ideas, thoughts, and concerns within the company. Studies have shown that even after a layoff, companies that have excellent communication are able to retain the surviving employees. Gertrude did survive a corporate merger and was very concerned about her future with the company. Her immediate managers communicated right away that she was a huge value to the organization and would be getting a promotion within the year. This ultimately provided Gertrude with a reason to fully commit to a new organizational structure. Important disadvantages. Number 1, workplace communication can lead to the snowball effect in worker actions. For example, many times when employees quit, there is a snowball effect where additional employees also quit. This usually occurs due to employees who communicate freely with each other over workplace concerns. Companies can avoid this issue if they are sensitive to worker complaints and issues. Number 2, workplace communication can lead to worker burnout or information overload. While most employees are happy about the ability to communicate both upward and downward in an organization, there are limits to the amount of information that they want to receive. If employees are deluged with too many messages or repetitive information, it can hamper employee productivity. Gertrude is currently in that situation due to her extended vacation. As we just saw, workplace communication can be utilized in both positive and negative manners. Positive strategies mean utilizing communications to increase worker productivity and job satisfaction and lower absenteeism and job turnover. This can be implemented by organizations by having an open communications policy. Downward communication should be used to inform and educate employees on corporate news and events, and to combat rumors and problems. Upward communication should be allowed by management so employees can ask questions, submit suggestions, and offer different points of view. In summary, workplace communication can be used to motivate employees, increase productivity, and decrease absenteeism and turnover. Employees need to feel that they are able to communicate with superiors and with coworkers. Companies need to listen to worker feedback and take action when needed. This will result in a company with excellent productivity and employee satisfaction.
So that was a good little summary of this whole concept of communication. And even though I didn't reference particularly upward and downward, we would assume that information will go up and down in organizations. What they did talk about, though, is the formal and informal in terms of official information and how official information can flow upwards and downwards, but also some of the challenges with informal communications and how informal communications can necessitate or ensure is a warning to companies to make sure that they give enough information so that misinformation or wrong information or grapevine type information doesn't lead to destructive behaviors like people leaving the organization. Any questions on this first section? Okay. Well, the next thing we talked about, well, okay, if communication is so important, what are some of the barriers to it? Obviously, there are lots of stumbles along the way where information either doesn't flow or flows in error. Well, Let's look at some of these. First of all, there's something called filtering. Filtering is generally a tendency just to weed out certain key parts by the people who are relaying the information. So for example, I got some bad news to tell you, and I don't want to tell you too much bad news, so I'll just select a few of the bad news items. Oh, our sales are down, and you know, we need to really increase our sales. What I don't tell you is if our sales don't improve, our business is just headed for bankruptcy and we're going to be in serious trouble. So effectively, filtering is a problem in communications because people filter information because they don't want to hurt people's feelings or they want to keep information private. But the challenge with filtering is not all the information gets relayed. So as a result, miscommunications often occur, and that can have some negative effects. We also have it from the receiver's point of view, where we have a kind of a filtering from the receiver's perspective called selective perception. And selective perception means that the receiver only wants to hear what they want to hear. So if you don't want to hear something or you disagree with something, you're basically going to close your ears to it. If you want to hear something and you think that, yeah, this is going to be positive to you, that's the stuff you hear. So it is a form of unconscious filtering that occurs by the receiver that often leads to mistakes. I didn't hear the critical part because I wasn't interested in the critical part. We also run from a receiver's point of view in terms of the concept of defensiveness, where, you know, it's a natural human sense where we either fight or flight. We either oppose what negative information is coming at us, especially if it's about us. Oh, you did a very poor job. So in our minds, we put up a block, a mental block to save ourselves, to kind of fight it off and say, no, I disagree. I did a very good job. Now you're absolutely wrong. So you basically counter it. Or the flight thing, which is, okay, I can't listen to this now. We'll see you later. So that sort of thing can lead to miscommunication because the communication is not achieved. And they talk about fight, and they talk about flight, and they talk about this concept of the deer in headlights freeze, where people have no response whatsoever, or the worst, even worse than freezing, which is fainting, which is people being just so overwhelmed that their body shuts down. These collective things are known as really defensive behaviors, which the receiver will put in place in order to protect themselves from physical or emotional harm. Okay? And again, our emotions play a key role in this defensive behavior. As was mentioned in the video, information overload is just so much too. When I open my email, I see 40 emails there. I think to myself, holy moly, how am I going to deal with this? This is what's called information overload. It is just too much coming at us at once, and as a result, we have trouble as individuals dealing with it all. Language is another key one. Organizations are known for their internal speak. So, for example, the college uses terms that are not familiar to people outside the college, including students. So when I talk to you about the peers, to me, I know what peers is. It is the standard teaching outline for every single course the college offers. So it is my roadmap for a course. Okay, and that's up on a database called the Program Information Retrieval System, and effectively I can go access it and find out what I should be covering in the course. However, to you, peers means nothing. You don't know what peers is, nor should you, really. But if I use the word peers flippantly, because I'm used to it, and you look at me as if I got two heads and say, I don't know what you're talking about. So the language of work is a real problem. And a lot of organizations have a jargon. If you listen to NASA, I've been watching the Perseverance going to Mars. You know, NASA is full of jargon. The provincial government is full of jargon. These acronyms, you know, that are internally, the people who work in the organization know it. People outside the organization have to think about it. Another big barrier is nonverbal language at work. You know, nonverbal language refers to anything that's not in words. So it could be in writing, body language, manipulation of objects, these sorts of things. And if, for example, I'm saying you should be really happy, but I got a sad face, I'm sending out two distinctly different messages. You should be happy, but my face is sad, so I'm telling you, no, I'll be sad. So this is a real barrier. This lady here, for example, got some tips with regards to some of these barriers. So let's just take a look at this.
One of the most frustrating things in life is miscommunication. And in business, this is disastrous when this happens because it can impact team dynamics, strategies, you name it. Things can go downward quite quickly. Well, if you would like to improve communication skills at work, stay tuned because I have some really great tips for you in this video. In order to improve communication at work, you need to be a master of mindfulness because you got to kind of tune into your body sensations when you are communicating. There is energy around us all the time, and picking up on that stuff is critical. So stay tuned until the end of this video because I'm giving you my free mindfulness work guide so that you can be a better communicator. Hi, I'm Adriana Girdler, a productivity expert with over 20 plus years in the business. Good communication in business is a must, and I'm going to share with you 5 tips on how you can be a great communicator at work. Underestimate people's understanding. A graduate student from Stanford University did this study which showed that those who were presenting overestimated how much their audience was taking in. Now, we do this all the time. We think that I said something and guess what? You've soaked it all up. It's not the case. So what you need to do is underestimate. So as I like to say, over communicate. A lot of times, just because we said something once, we could have been distracted, something's on our mind, who knows? But saying it over and over again, over communicating, particularly really critical points, is a key if you're going to be a great communicator at work. Clarify and double check. Now, this is a two-way street. So whenever I'm giving information, as I said earlier on, I over communicate to make sure, but I also ask people, do you understand what I'm saying to you? And asking. But vice versa, if you're getting information from people, particularly instructions or agreements, you really want to say, okay, let me repeat back to you what I heard you say. Or is this the agreements that we have? Those simple little techniques are huge in ensuring that everybody's on the same page. So clarify and double check. Have you ever had to re-clarify information that someone gave to you because it was really unclear? Well, in the comments below, say, hell yeah. Take a breather. Okay, that simple technique of just being really aware of breath can play a huge impact in communication because it gives you that 10 seconds just to kind of let things go. Things can be stressful, things can be frustrating, and if you have to reply right away without taking that second, it can have dire consequences on outcomes, and you don't want to do it. So I actually have a 10-second, 24-hour rule I want to share with you. If you have something that is really critical, give yourself 10 seconds. Take some deep breaths, quickly count to 10 before your answer. It just gives you enough time to formulate your thought. And the other little trick I have is 24 hours. If something major happened and you're stressed and frustrated and you need to communicate about it, don't rush into it, okay? Because sometimes I can have a real negative impact. Give yourself 24 hours. Give yourself that breather, that room to think about it, calm down, and truly your communication will be a lot better. It will be one that is not charged, and that's exactly what you want when you're going to be a great communicator at work. Stay focused. Now, this may kind of seem like, what, for communication? But yes, in communication, you need to stay focused. And what I mean by this, really, it's listening and not formulating. So if you're going to be great with communication at work and improve your communication skills, you really have to learn how to be in the moment and listen to what the other person is saying to you. This is something that we could all work on, including myself, every day, of listening and really being in the moment and not trying to formulate our thoughts so that we have a great response to give back to the person, because then we're missing out on some really important things that they're trying to tell us because we're so focused on ourselves when really we got to be focused on the other person. Choose the right method. Now, we all know to have effective communication is not always about face-to-face interactions. We have communication all the time with people electronically, and if you're lucky, you get something in the snail mail like a card, which I always love. I still like that old-fashioned kind of communication. But that all being said, there are different ways to communicate, and you got to know when to do it. So if you have something really important to say to someone, I really highly recommend you do it face to face. That way you can have conversation and they can explain their side of the story. But if it's just generic communication as to what's going on, email is the place to do it. But try to keep it short and sweet. On that note, really think about what and how and who. And then based on that, you can decide the method of communication that's going to work best. Now that you're a better communicator at work, it is important that you become very mindful about your communication. And I want you to take a look at this amazing download I have for you. Just click on the link below and you can grab these great tips and techniques that are going to help you improve your communication.
So she's right. She has some interesting bits there on her page that I would recommend that you click to at your leisure. The other thing that was, that rears its head so much in terms of communication are gender differences. And gender, the two genders are very different with how they speak and how they understand and interpret information. This can cause some various serious problems at work. And we have probably the biggest thing that we have to do is to appreciate the differences and develop an understanding for them. So I have this this little example of a discussion on gender differences in the classroom. So here we go.
Rough day at the office. They let me dress casually. They ain't working at Grindstone. How you doing, man?
Fine, I guess.
Good, good. Well, I'm gonna go to the den, get some reading done, and then dinner is 7, like normal.
Jim, you don't care about me anymore.
Well, I just literally like 2 seconds ago asked you how you're doing. Sign of caring. Not sure.
You know what? You always do this. Why don't you just go back to your den or just do whatever?
Forget the den. I'll just eat at the bar tonight.
We're laughing now, but how many of us have been in that situation before? I didn't even ask for a show of hands, but that's great that you got it. That shows that it definitely reciprocated. You know, many of us have been in Mondi's situation where we said, why is he not reading my nonverbal cues? Or in Jim's situation, wondering at how we could get such a hostile response from a seemingly innocuous question. But even though we have not all might have been in that situation that Mondi and Jim might have been in, all of us have been in a situation where we might have had an issue dealing with members of the opposite sex. So in strategic communications class, we learn about the importance of being able to project our ideas and communicate effectively with other people. So in a way to be able to do that more effectively, we'd like to introduce gender communication techniques. And so today, we're going to be talking to you about some of the gender-related communication barriers that we've come across and identify them. Then we're going to talk about some possible recommendations to help you rectify those gender communication barriers. And then we're going to stop off by taking action and maybe replaying the scenario we just saw by actually applying some of those techniques that we just learned. So let's get things started. Let's talk about a few communication barriers. Ying, if you're stressed as a woman, how do you feel?
Well, I cannot speak for all women, but if you're not feeling the same way, treat it as an example. As a woman, if I'm stressed out, I want to talk. I want to communicate my feelings, not to get suggestions, not criticism, and I just want to get reassurance. I want to hear things such as, well, I know you're going through a tough time, but everything is going to be okay. So how about guys, Mark?
That's really interesting, Ying, because I think I'm a lot of the opposite. You know, as a guy, if I come back and I'm very stressed, I feel like I need to be left alone. I need to retreat back to my cave, get my head straight, and come back and get into the groove of things with a better mind on my shoulders. So we see that there's a little bit difference in how we act when we're stressed. How about the way that we'd like to be feeling in a relationship?
Well, I definitely want to feel special. It does not have to be complicated or expensive. For example, something as simple as a hug, something as inexpensive as $5 flowers from the farmer's market. It will all work. It doesn't matter what you do. What matters is the signals you send. How about guys?
That's really interesting to know. From a guy's perspective, I just feel like I need to be needed. You know, it's not that I want to be in a needy relationship. It's not that I need to feel that I'm always being acknowledged, but just to know that I'm still of use. You know, sometimes it gets into the situation where you just go through the daily grind of things and you forget the importance of appreciation. But speaking of which, in relationships, what do you think women are like?
Women are likened to be waves, so sometimes we are happy and sometimes not so much so. It's natural, we are not crazy. And I suspect women's emotional cycle has something to do with a typical behavior guys do when they're in relationships. You want to talk about that, Mark?
Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because when I'm in a relationship, or any type of relationship for that matter, you know, I consider myself more like a rubber band. Sometimes I won't be very close, but other times I need to step back and have a little bit of free space, some autonomy. That doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I need a little bit of free time to myself. And I'm sorry if that makes you feel crazy. But let's talk a little bit further about some possible best practices and recommendations that we could go about in being able to address some of these communication barriers that result between the genders. So why don't we start off? Ying, would you like to talk about one of these recommendations?
Sure. First one, if you are in a fight, do not panic. Always remember to stay on your side of the net. That means if you are the person who feels hurt and you want to express your feelings, be very careful not to blame the other person. On the other side, if you are the person who's taking the complaints, be careful that the other person is not trying to personally attack you. There are 4 important words that you all need to remember. It's not your fault. It works wonders. Try it next time. It might save your life. The second tip is to practice empathy. Here at Stanford, we talk about empathy all the time. But the key is to practice, practice, and practice. So how to do that? Just as a quick reminder, here at the base, we need to build up understanding and respect for our differences. And upon this base, we want to have good techniques. We want to listen well, and we want to ask questions to validate whether we got the message right. And last, most importantly, we want to give the reassurance. Everything is fine. I hear you. But there's one more really important thing. Mark will talk about that.
Sure. Now, the first 2 rules you should be aware of, especially if you're at the GSB and have taken touchy-feely, practice empathy, stay on your side of the net. But there's a third important rule that I think we need to go over, and when it comes to the importance of gender communication, and that is the golden rule. More specifically, do not practice the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Do unto others as you would like to be done unto yourself. Now, I hope you've seen throughout this presentation a lot of times that the needs of one gender might not necessarily be the same needs of the other gender. We all have different needs. We all have different ways in which we process information. And that's most certainly true between the genders. So when it comes to being able to communicate with a member of the opposite gender, put yourself in that person's shoes and realize that their needs might not be the same needs that you may have. So we've talked about a few of the issues that result from gender communication. We've shared a few recommendations. But what good are they if we don't see them practiced? So why don't we go over the scenario that we first went over when we started this presentation and apply some of these techniques with a few commentary.
Sure, you let me dress casual, but they work my ass off. How you doing today?
Fine, I guess.
You sure? You seem like You want to talk about something?
Here, Jim uses empathy to gauge Mondi's emotions and realize that her nonverbal cues is what he should be paying attention to.
Actually, you know what, Jim? Sometimes I feel that you don't appreciate me anymore. I mean, I know that you're busy at work and things like that, but when you come back home and walk straight to the den,
just to finish off this morning, here's another video that talks about these issues.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have someone actually joining us here today, so give me 1 second. Hello, Mark. Can you hear me? Mark? There's tons of static, Mark. Is that you, Mark? Can you change your line? Mark. Sorry, everyone. So up until about 6 months ago, this was my normal morning call. Now my normal morning is I wake up between 7 to 8:30 in the morning every day when either my kids jump on my bed, they start screaming, they start hitting each other, they start crying, something always happens. And I get out of bed, I make the most of the morning, I play with them a little bit. I mean, it's an absolute blast. Then I take a few steps, and in less than 5 seconds, I'm at work. I get into my study, I open up my computer, and this is what I see. Boom. 1, 2, 3, sometimes up to 20 different people with either their faces or names on screens on my computer. 30 different people from over 10 different nationalities spread all around the world talking nonstop. 5 different offices around the world, 5 different time zones, complete chaos. But it's actually a blast. So I do this between 2 to 6 hours every single day of the week. I currently manage a team of 30 people from 10 very, 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 very different nationalities. I don't actually know what is tougher, the remote part of having to interact with all of my team just using Skype, video conference, telephone, or email, or the different cultural interpretations to everyday things that happen in the workplace. Luckily, my own personal journey has been a bit of a nomad experience. I was actually born here in Spain, and before I was even a month, I moved to Africa. Then I spent 5 years in Puerto Rico, then a few more years in Spain, then 5 years in the Netherlands. Then I spent 10 years between LA, San Francisco, and New York. Please don't try to add all of this up, it's a little bit chaotic. Before I moved back to Europe, traveled a little bit around, and finally settling down back in Madrid. I'm no expert in cultures. I haven't studied about cultures, and I haven't read many books about cultures, but I've had hundreds of experiences managing everyday problems that arise from managing a multicultural team remotely. And still, I make many mistakes. So why am I talking about this today? Because this situation that I face every single day will happen to most of you if it already hasn't happened. People want flexibility. People want the choice of where to work, and they want it now. Take a look at this graph here. So this is what millennials want from the workplace. They want training. I think we can all agree with that. They want to learn at work, and they want flexible working hours. They want to work remotely. They want to choose when they work. They want to have flexibility during the day. They want this above cash bonuses. They want this above private healthcare. They want this above more vacation. I mean, they want this above maternity, paternity benefits. People want flexibility. I've heard from many people on my team how great it is to work remotely. The reality is that they end up working a lot more hours, actually a ton more hours, very late at night. But they love the flexibility that they have during the middle of the day. And remote working will become even more common because the new generation of managers want it in their workplace. And the beauty about remote working is that you're actually adding a huge employee benefit for much less cost. And you're actually creating loyalty for people in the workplace. It's a killer addition for people. But with all this flexibility, it's actually not easy to make it happen. It's actually quite tough. There are tons of problems that arise from everyday situations in the workplace. To illustrate how simple yet complex this problem is, I wanted to share a story that happened to me about 2 years ago when I first started working remotely with my team in South Africa. I've been doing this for about 5 years. And as usual, I was sitting down in front of my computer in Madrid, and I had one of my first conference calls with my team in South Africa. Conference call went great, and at the end of it, one of my team members tells me, "I'll call you just now," which I thought, great. And I was actually very excited to get into the detail of it. So I ended the call, and I waited in front of my computer, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then after about 15 minutes, I sent a message to my team member in in South Africa. And I told him, hey, are we talking just now? Which responded, yes, yeah, just now. And he pinged me this message. See this image describing how South Africans define time. So just now wasn't, I think what we're all thinking right now, we'll talk in a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes. For South Africans, just now can mean, we'll talk in the future, hopefully today, if not tomorrow, maybe someday in the distant future. You don't really know when you're going to talk. How could something so simple, such as expressions about time, lead to such misunderstanding? Right? This had been an internal meeting, so it wasn't a big problem. But imagine this had been an external meeting with clients. Cultural differences can lead to huge misunderstandings. And the remoteness part of it made it even worse because I couldn't get out of my desk, go around the hallway, tap a person on the shoulder and say, hey, are we talking just now? And of course, this was my first week of work and I didn't want to sound like an idiot asking a question. With my own team, remote working situations can be even more confusing. So just this week, introducing the own project in India, and it went extremely well. And I wanted to share my enthusiasm with my team. So in one of our weekly calls, I shared with the rest of the team, and I told one of my Indian coworkers, "You're killing it out there." And the next day, to my surprise, I get an email very early in the morning from my Indian team member asking me, what did I do wrong? Can you give me advice? Can you tell me how I can improve? I was taken aback. I was actually trying to express my enthusiasm and the great job that he had done, and he had interpreted something completely different. The exact same sentence in the exact same language, he understood in two completely different ways. The lack of context created this misunderstanding. Context is absolutely necessary when working with remote. So even with two teams with the same natural language, such as English, there are still problems created due to lack of context. So about a year ago, I was having quite a few communication problems between my US and my London-based team. We had tons of meetings, probably too many nowadays in most companies, and lots of actions were coming out, lots of activities, we're doing lots of things, but the results were poor, people were not communicating well with each other, and people were getting extremely frustrated. So I needed to do something about this. So I bought 30 copies of a book about how to work with people from different cultures. And I gave my whole team this book here, The Culture Map by Aaron Mayer, and the effect was absolutely amazing. It brought out in the open, in plain sight, how different people are on the team. So I had 30 different people from 10 very different nationalities that were all speaking the exact same language, in this case English, but were all saying things that were completely different and were acting completely different in the same situations. So for example, my team in Latin America, they're very hierarchical. So they didn't understand when people were responding in certain ways. Or my US and my Dutch teams based in London, they found it completely normal that in the middle of a conference call, you can interrupt the person and you can say your opinion, and other people were going absolutely nuts with this. This self-awareness and bringing this out in this open was absolutely amazing. It was a key driving force for our success. So I think we all agree that remote working is great, and having this flexibility in the workplace is absolutely amazing. But it can actually also lead to loneliness. In my case, over the last 5 years, I've actually felt lonely quite a few times, sitting in my little study in front of my computer all by myself. And when I've been in the office with other people and actually have to travel, I felt very lonely on the road. I had to take lots of conference calls in hotel rooms, in trains, in planes, in public bathrooms, even in horrible situations. I had to take calls in the middle of the morning, very late at night, at 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, really horrible situations, both physically and mentally challenging situations. So you have to find a way to make yourself be in a comfortable situation. Co-working areas, such as this one here, are great to solve this problem. You can feel that you're part of a company. You can feel that work is being done sitting around with other people. You can network with others. You can get inspired by others. You can inspire others. You can just get out of your chair, grab a coffee, and have a conversation with someone from a completely different company. You just feel that work is being done. So remote working and co-working areas are absolutely great. I think there's no doubt about it. But the reality is that you still need physical presence to create a truly incredible team. You can have amazing relationships just via video conference, via email. You can establish some sort of relationship between your team. But you need the physical presence to create empathy, to really add empathy to your team. So remote working is the future, but you need physical presence at least a couple of times a year to truly create today with one last thought to share with everyone. I want you to start thinking about what you need to do to be able to wake up in the future, hopefully not a very distant future, and to be able to get up every morning with your loved ones and with your family, and be able to take your first call in a place such as this. Sometimes being away from your coworkers isn't such a bad thing. Thank you.
So I think that kind of spoke very much to today's environment that we're in, and it leads into the next topic, which I'll pick up in the next class.